Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff, and it is Monday, February 1st, 2010, and I'm out here on Paradise Island off of Nassau in the Bahamas. A friend of mine, Mark Skousen, is having an economic conference, and I am one of the speakers. I will be returning to my office in Connecticut tomorrow, but I wanted to take some time out to comment on this video blog. Basically, last week we found out that Congress, or the Senate rather, voted to confirm the re-nomination of Ben Bernanke to a second term as Fed governor. On the same day that they did that, they also voted to increase the national debt ceiling by $1.9 trillion. Now, first of all, they could have just done it by $2 trillion, but they didn't want the public to realize how much they were increasing the debt. So I think they borrowed a page from marketing, and instead of having a product at $20, they'll sell it for $19.99. They wanted to stay just under $2 trillion, but $1.9 trillion is practically $2 trillion. But I don't think it's a coincidence that on the same day the Senate voted to increase the debt ceiling by close to $2 trillion, that they also reconfirmed Ben Bernanke. After all, in order to borrow that kind of money, Congress, the Senate in particular, knows that they're going to need the cooperation of Ben Bernanke. He's got to keep those printing presses running 24/7. Ben Bernanke has to step up to the plate and buy up a lot of those treasuries by printing money and monetizing the debt. And also, Ben Bernanke has to keep interest rates artificially low so that the government can afford to make the interest payments on that debt. And I'm sure that one of the reasons that Ben Bernanke was reconfirmed for another term is because he probably assured the senators that in exchange for their votes, that he would be highly cooperative in their efforts to run up a deficit. And so we get the worst of both worlds. We get Ben Bernanke sworn in or nominated for another term, and we get a reckless Congress. Unfortunately, what we need is real independence at the Federal Reserve. We need a Federal Reserve that will refuse to monetize government debt, that will raise interest rates and force politicians to act responsibly. Of course, maybe if we can elect some senators that would act responsibly on their own, they wouldn't need the Federal Reserve to do it for them. Unfortunately, the American public is being failed on both levels. We're getting failed by our politicians and by our central bankers. Speaking about a failure from our politicians, this morning I read news of the budget that Barack Obama was proposing. The government is now going to be spending a little over $3.8 trillion. That's the federal budget. And that budget includes $1.4 trillion in borrowing, in deficit spending. So here you have President Obama in his State of the Union address saying we need to tackle the deficit. At the same time, he's proposing a budget with a $1.4 trillion deficit in 1 year. Now, also, to put the size of this deficit spending in perspective, it amounts to better than a third of the government's entire budget, meaning 1/3 of what they're paying for is being paid for with borrowed money. But another way to look at it is for every dollar the government collects in taxes, the government is spending $1.60. Think about that. It's like a family. If a family earns $100,000 a year, they spend $160,000 a year. That they're spending 60% more than they're earning. In the case of the federal government, the government is spending 60% more than it collects in taxes to fund its expenditures. I mean, that's insane. How can that possibly be? How can a government collecting $2.4 billion in taxes borrow an additional $2.4 trillion is their tax revenues, and then they borrow another $1.4 trillion to finance their spending? Obviously, we've raised living beyond our means to a whole new stratosphere. And there are going to be dire consequences from this level of fiscal irresponsibility. And if the president is still talking about this spending freeze that's going to take place a year from now on less than 20% of a budget that's growing out of control right now. If the president really were serious about cutting spending and addressing the deficit, he'd be doing it right now. He wouldn't be proposing this massive federal spending bill and this huge deficit. Now, I know the president likes to say, but we have to wait until the economy is in better shape before we rein in deficit spending. No, the economy is going to get in worse shape specifically because of all this reckless spending. We need to address this spending right now before the economy gets any worse, because we're never going to have a real economic recovery. We're never going to have prosperity. We're never going to have real job creation unless we bring government spending under control right now, unless we tackle these deficits right now. Because as long as governments are borrowing and spending, the private sector can't grow because it has to finance a gargantuan government. Anything that we need to do to really grow the economy, to produce wealth and provide employment opportunities, is being suffocated by the need to finance this massive increase in the size and the burden of our federal government. And right now, the one thing that we've got that's keeping this thing together is foreign buying. And I know that the U.S. dollar has been rallying of late. The rally is not that significant in my opinion. I mean, the dollar index is still trading below the 80 level. I think right now it's around 79 in change, 79.30, 79.50 tops. But I think the reason that the dollar has strengthened, and that has, of course, made it possible for the government to sell bonds, is that I think right now attention is being sidetracked. I think it's being diverted to the sideshow over in Europe. I think people are worried about a potential default in Greece and other problems in Europe, and I think that's diverting their attention from the real problems here in the United States, because this is the center ring. Europe is a sideshow, and the fact that people are now worrying about problems in the euro, maybe that's taking the pressure off of the dollar, but soon attention will be diverted back where it belongs to what's happened in the United States. Maybe the announcement of this gigantic federal deficit and enormous amount of spending, maybe that will shock some people back to reality. I don't think that what we're seeing in the dollar is going to be a meaningful long-term rally. I do expect this bear market rally to fizzle relatively soon. At the same time, you're going to see a resumption of the increase in the price of gold and the price of oil and the price of other commodities, and that's going to bring a lot of pressure to bear on the federal budget as people begin to appreciate the gravity of these deficits and their effects on inflation and on interest rates in the United States. Anyway, that's it for today. I will be back in Connecticut, out of the sunshine and the palm trees, back into the cold and the snow, and I will be blogging again maybe as soon as Wednesday. Anyway, take care, everybody, and I will be back soon. Bye-bye.